Well, hello and good day, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us for another webinar. We are so happy to have you here. We are here because of you. And a lot of people have been very interested in food, in the connection of their genes and diet. And I come across constantly, I work with clients saying, what food is best for me? What do I eat? How should I eat? And how do I get the best nutrition for me? And that's what we're going to be talking about tonight. We are going to be talking about how your DNA can help inform and determine the best diet for your body. And I am so thrilled to be joined here by a brilliant colleague, Justin Harris. Hey, Justin, how you doing?
Good to see you, Dr. Laura. Thanks everybody for coming tonight. Back on that topic of nutrition, it's ever present and ever relevant because everything eats, and most of us eat every day. And I've said this before, but I consider nutrition to be the biggest epigenetic variable that we have control over day to day. Right? Remember that epigenetics means that the environment selection that we have, it influences our cells, how they work, how they behave. So food has drastically different effects on the human body. And we need to find a way to customize and understand what really makes it the best choice for you. So of course, the genes are one of our baseline, settings that we use because we know that enzyme activity in the body has huge influence over what your body does with that information coming in. Food is information, and our body takes information and it does things with it. And I think that personalization is where we need to go modern day, because if I don't know anything about you and I'm going to work on nutrition with you, I might take patient A and put them on protocol X. And patient A might have a great response to protocol X. Patient B might have no response to protocol X. But then patient C might have a negative response to protocol X. I might hurt patient C with the same protocol. Right. So that's why we don't talk in terms of these baseline diets, and this is the optimal diet for human beings. There's way too much going on to put everybody on the same game plan. Right. So I think that we're going to dive a little bit into that tonight. And I hope you guys have filled out that questionnaire, because I'm really curious as to what everybody's actually here for, if it's weight management or cognitive enhancement. There's so many different areas you can go with nutrition.
And I'll tell you, I think it's absolutely brilliant, the work that you do. When you consider, actually at the beginning of this year, some of the latest research has really found that our understanding of the relationship between genetics and the optimal diet, that really flies in the face of that conventional one size fits all, or, your protocol X not being appropriate for patients A, B, and C collectively, that it is, it really comes down to that personalization. And there are several groundbreaking studies that now suggest that an individual's genetic makeup may have a greater influence on metabolic outcomes than previously thought. I mean, it's really amazing. There was some research done January of this year at the University of Virginia, where they were publishing findings indicating that genetic background has more significant impact on things like body weight, fat mass, blood sugars, lipids, than specific diets. But diets can influence that, because really, what is food but information? We cannot utilize food in the form that it is in when we pick it or buy it or harvest it or whatever else. It is the process of our bodies, the way that we use the enzymes to start breaking them down, chewing mechanically, all of these different things, our gut. Okay, well, first of all, the stomach acid, making sure that it's acidic enough to continue to chemically break down the food, but then the gut bacteria, the population, because I've said oftentimes, we are not what we eat, we are what our gut biome breaks down and allows us to absorb. So what kind of health is our gut in? It all plays a part, but we just are now really coming into researching how genetics fits into that. And it's absolutely amazing. And it's it's so exciting that we are there on that cutting edge and have been working and doing this for years now, and finally in the research field, and in more of a large portion of research is coming out due to the push, the interest of this personalized nutrition, this personalized medicine and prevention. It's just absolutely amazing.
Yeah, well, and I really think that it's the right direction to go because, like, I think we need to move out of this mindset of one diet being the optimal diet for humans. I mean, I'm guilty of even falling for that trap myself. Like the first time I ever tried a paleo diet, I was like, well, our ancestors ate this way, so that means that this is the absolute, ideal diet for humans across the board. And what you find is that even within the blanket term of paleo, there's higher and lower carb versions of it, right? There's higher or lower plant toxin versions of it. You can do it with a fasting element, without a fasting element. How are you actually orchestrating your macros? Because technically, you're on a paleo diet if you have sweet potato covered in honey 3 times a day and you don't have anything else. I mean, that's really paleo just means like the food selection itself, but that does not mean that it's a be all end all strategy, right? We need to treat the person, not just what their genes or anything else would suggest. So within any of these diets, a Mediterranean diet at a baseline, I think that's a great diet. It's a real whole foods diet. But you can do it with higher or lower fat. You can do it with higher or lower starches. A lot of Mediterranean diets are actually pretty friggin' high in starches, depending on how you actually orchestrate that. So we have to arrive at some way to personalize this to the person. So yeah, I take the genes, I take their lifestyle into consideration. We even look at their endocrine function, right? We look at the way that they exercise, the different variables of their brain, right? Like, should we have add in a little bit of coconut oil or something like that to maybe improve the brain function? So there's so many ways to customize and personalize, and genes are just the ultimate tools because you can't change them. You have to take advantage of them instead and leverage them for the best quality nutrition.
And going along with our test don't guess, you know, first of all, knowing the foundation on which you are working, your DNA. Okay. Also looking at what is the current state of your body, through blood tests, looking at what's your blood glucose, what's your hemoglobin A1C, how are all of these different markers to say what you are doing right now and what you've been exposed to, what state are you in at this moment. But then going even further for a test don't guess is to say, okay, so for the things that I am doing and changes I am making, the advancement in wearable technologies is amazing because you can get real-time or near real-time biofeedback, looking at these biometrics from things like the Aura Ring or a CGM or, some of these other wearable technologies where you can actually see, hey, how is the food that I am eating affecting my body? And where do I want to go with this? So, because I know that you implement and use that information with your clients. I know I do with mine. And I just find it absolutely just fun. I really love the personalization. And I want to mention this because I was also when I was doing some research on this subject, the fact that with this personalized nutrition movement, there's actually a huge study being done with Northwestern and 13 other clinical laboratories. It's funded by the NIH, where they are looking at exactly this. It's the largest study of this kind at this time. And actually, it had started like 6 years ago, and the information that they have been gathering, is now leading to focusing on nutrition. And the other thing that I had read in this information, this study, is that there was, oh gosh, I think there was like 800,000. I remember there were several 100,000 people that are already part of this study, and 90% of them are the groups of underrepresented populations in research. So it's not just your white males, it's really getting that broad spectrum to have more of a full, rich information basis on these populations of people and how all of this works. So really exciting movements, is, totally nerding out because, as a scientist, but I think that we should get to the poll because I want to see what people have answered.
There we go.
Perfect. Thank you. So question 1, we asked, have you ever taken a DNA test for health or nutrition purposes? Overwhelmingly, like 3/4 of you said yes. And a little over 20% said no, but I'm interested. And 5% of you said no, and you're not so sure if you want to. Perfectly okay. You know what? I'm glad you guys are here. Maybe this is something just to gather some information so that way maybe you can make a decision to say, no, I definitely don't want to, or maybe I should look into this more, as well as those people who are interested. So our second question was, what is your biggest challenge when it comes to nutrition? And we've got some even splits here. So it looks like the biggest thing is weight management. That and energy levels. So yeah, that seems to be issues that a lot of people have, even if it's not necessarily in nutrition, but yet nutrition plays a major part in that. Next runner-up was some digestive issues, food intolerances, and then managing blood sugars and hormonal imbalance are trailing. And for those of you who said other, pop that in the chat. I'd love to know what is your biggest challenge that may not be listed in the choices that we gave.
Yeah, and what's interesting with this is that a lot of those may be related, right? Like if you're struggling with weight management and you also have food intolerances, right, that may be causing that microinflammation at the level of the gut. You may have hormonal imbalances, right? The 7% of you that are trying to optimize that. Energy levels. I mean, it can be a mitochondrial thing. If you have mitochondrial issues, dysfunction, your body's not going to be nearly as efficient at burning fat either. Same with digestive issues, right? If you've got gut dysbiosis going on, of course, it's going to make it so that the body composition is of less good quality because you're not assimilating the nutrients properly. So I think actually every one of those answers in its own way is actually related to the next answer.
Oh, absolutely. They're all interconnected in some way, form, or fashion. But generally, it's good to have more of a focus, because that way the person can have a baseline at which to say, okay, here's my starting point. This is really what I want to work on. And then once they are working with someone and making those changes, integrating recommendations, putting in the work to make themselves healthier and better, then they can take that baseline and see where they have changed over time. So that's really important. So our next question, which type of diet have you tried or are currently following? And it looks like intermittent fasting is our winner at about 60%, and followed up by keto, low carb, then Mediterranean, and then pretty much a split between standard American diet, vegetarian, vegan, paleo trailing at the end, with only 3% of you doing a custom DNA-based diet. So, and I know that these as well can kind of blend into each other. So, all right.
I'm
Question.
curious if any of you are on a carnivore diet, because that's not listed there. I mean, I guess you could call it a low carb diet, but maybe put in the comments if any of you are doing the carnivore thing out of curiosity.
Yeah, if you're doing a carnivore diet, put in the number 1 in the chat. Make it nice, quick, and easy. All right. Well, there we go. We've got somebody doing it. So number 4, how confident are you that your current diet is right for your body? Wonderful that almost half of you say that you are somewhat confident. But just a step behind that, they're not confident. So hopefully this information that we cover with you today during this webinar will give you a little bit more confidence, or at least give you information to guide you on where to go to become more confident. And I love to see 10% of you said you are very confident, and that is fantastic. And I'm so glad that you joined us here. Maybe pearls of wisdom that you can share in the chat and other information. But boy, I'll tell you, it's nice when you have that confidence and you're feeling good and making life work for you with the food that you are eating. And then we do have almost 10% that say, I have no idea. And that's okay. Again, that's why you're here. And our last question, what do you most want to learn from this webinar? And this is really important because we are going to tailor on the spot areas that we are going to focus. And I do see that
All of the above.
50% of you is all the above. So outside of that, our next winner was which foods may be harmful or beneficial based on my genes. So we will be weaving that in for sure, as well as, how your DNA impacts nutrient absorption, because that's important as well. That actually is part of the answer of foods that can be harmful or beneficial for you based on your genes. Because obviously, remember I said in the beginning that food, is there. We don't absorb it. We can't utilize it in the form when we are actually eating it. But food is information. It's information for our cells to do something, to express genes in such a way, to make other things happen. And it's how well do we do that? And then let's see. So really understanding genetic food sensitivities and how to optimize weight loss through genetic insights, are almost neck to neck on that. So now we know pretty much where to focus. All right. So something I wanted to mention, some of the terminology that we're going to be talking about, as we were talking about genes and food and how they relate to one another, is that there are 2 terms that you should be aware of, and that's nutrigenetics and nutrigenomics. And these 2 terms are closely related, but are distinct in what they do, in the way how nutritional science and genetics work. And so nutrigenetics, this is how your genes affects your response to nutrients. Okay. So the nutrigenetics explores how genetic variations and some of the SNPs or, copy number variants or indels, how they influence an individual's reaction to the nutrients, the diets, the supplements that they are taking in. For example, if someone has a variant of the MTHFR gene, okay, and they have reduced ability to process folic acid, okay, or folate, they would benefit more from things like, a methylfolate, or depending on their SHMT1 gene, whether they should have an adenylated form of folate called folinic acid. But also, they need that support in folate in B9. So foods that are rich in those B vitamins in B9, that would be very important. So really, the goal is personalized nutrition based on that genetic makeup. Now, when we're talking about nutrigenomics. This is how nutrients affect your gene expression. So remember I said that the food we eat is information to the cells and can affect how our genes are expressed. That's nutrigenomics. It really looks at how the diet and nutrients turn genes on or off, or how they modify that gene expression. That's through epigenetics. So I just wanted to make sure that we have some clarity on the verbiage, the language of, the difference between the two. So,
Well, that goes back to what I was saying about how it really is epigenetic information. And it's like the biggest one, in my opinion, that we have control over. Like there's a lot of big areas, right? Like how we exercise and how we sleep and different things. But I think that because food also exists on such a large spectrum, right? Like everything from literal medicine to literal poison and everything in between, food can mean all of that modern day, right? In 2025. So if you have something that's just absolutely unrecognizable from the earth, but we've called it food, that's something that your body is going to take, and it's still information. It's still something that's input, and it's going to affect that epigenome, and ultimately it's going to affect your cell expression. I mean, you can imagine someone who has, morbidly obese. Well, they've taken that information and their body's done something with it. It's raised insulin and it's caused fat storage, and that's just because there was a certain volume of information or type of information, and the body took it and it did X. Versus someone who's really dialed with their nutrition. Look at the difference in body types and manifestation based on just the epigenomics that you've provided to the body. So this is really big. Like your body will do a lot of different things with the information that you give it.
so people wanted to know about how genes affect their food, and how their food affects them based on their genes, as well as, what's the best thing to eat, what's good for me, what's bad for me. So let's dive into talking about some of those genes. You know, when you have someone come to you, which genes are you looking at to help you determine how they process their foods, their nutrigenetics, um, you know, and then turning around as far as their nutrigenomics? What do you look at?
So I look at quite a few. It's not a one and done kind of a gene, unfortunately. We have genes that do directly influence macronutrient metabolism, and those are, of course, very important. I think that the underlying genes that I look at prior to that, though, are gut microbiome related, because that's the processing plant that the macros are going to go to in the first place. So, particularly, I look at GSTM1 because I like to know how your gut microbiome is detoxifying. And that's a relevant metric for modern day because of the glyphosates and the different things that are unfortunately accompanying the food that we have now. Another one would be that insulin response. I find that over and over again, people who have suboptimal insulin response genetically, being a gene called TCF7L2, they have a lot harder time dialing in those macronutrients, whether it be a high starch or a high fat diet. I've seen it a bunch of times now, and it's really a crazy thing to get your head around, that if you jump on a ketogenic diet, like an on purpose high fat diet with a suboptimal genetic insulin response, you can actually still be elevating your insulin over and over again in response to the fat, especially if it's saturated fat. And saturated fat, it is not the devil, right? Your body needs it for a lot of stuff. It doesn't independently cause heart disease, in my opinion, but that doesn't mean that everybody is genetically wired to go ahead and jump on a really high fat diet on purpose. So I typically look there first because that's going to indicate how difficult the rest of those macros are going to be to actually dial in. Then we do have like starch genetics that are really specific, right? So the AMY1 gene, that's a salivary amylase gene, and you can have suboptimal, moderate, or optimal. And that's really useful because there's actually some people, believe it or not, that try the low carb thing and they have low energy, they have brain fog, performance in the gym is really terrible. So those people are not wired to do the low carb thing, and they may need to, at very least, add in a carb cycling component, a carb loading component of some kind. We also have one for fatty acids, right? So that one's called APOA2. and that's for lipid metabolism. So again, you can have suboptimal, you can have moderate, or you can have optimal, and that's going to determine whether or not you should just kind of include fats and just let them naturally occur, like, you know, some salmon and some avocado, and just kind of let them show up, as opposed to adding a bunch of them in every meal on purpose, because it may be too much. Um, so we really look at several different genes, and that's just for the macronutrients. When it comes to micronutrients, we have a whole nother list, right? We have vitamin C genes like SLC23A1. We have 3 different vitamin D genes that we look at, and that's kind of a hormone more so than it is a micronutrient, but it's of relevance anyways if you're going to be supplementing. We have one for zinc, SLC30A8. So we can also tailor it in that respect as well, macros and micros together. You'll find that getting your micros right helps with a lot of different stuff, hormones and immune system, etc. Did I miss anything there, Dr. Laura?
Well, there's definitely more, but I'm sure people are like, wait a minute, what, what genes are we talking about? If you've done your 360 report, and I'm talking to our audience, please put a 1 in the chat. I want to see how many of you have done our DNA 360. If you have done your DNA 360, you would be looking at your diet nutrition report. And in the diet nutrition report, there are several sub-reports. Look at all those ones. Love to see it. Oh, hey, Mike. So I see a lot of repeat offenders, as Dr. Kosterman would put it. Love to see all of these people. Excellent. Oh, Teresa's, she has, but she's just waiting for results, as is Crystal. Fantastic. So again, you want to look at your diet nutrition report, and in there are sub-reports, and within the sub-report, you'll have like system summary, and you'll have things for carbohydrates, your what your relationship is to food. Okay, that's very important, and maybe, you know, we can touch on that as well. There's a section for your micronutrients, for microbiome. So this is where you will see the genes that Justin has been listing off, and then how that relates. And you can also check out our app, The DNA Way. Download that, because you've got all the information, you know, great how-tos and what does this do and other great things just for you right on that app. Not to mention that it links you to webinars. You can sign up right on the app. You can view our past webinars, and you can also listen to our podcast, read a lot of information, one-stop shop, so you don't have to go searching. So absolutely, you know, take a look, download our app and take a look at that. But some of the other genes that I think are very important that help to dictate our best eating. Again, getting into what people wanted to know on going, hey, you know, which foods are good for me, which foods are bad for me. Also leaning into the weight aspect, the health aspect, because your body needs these nutrients. That's why we eat food, is to get these nutrients, because they need it. So if you are not breaking them down, utilizing or absorbing them well, then 1, you're wasting money. 2, you're eating a lot of calories, which could, you know, do weight gain, but not getting the real benefits out of it. So knowing in the micronutrients, which you've already mentioned a few, okay, with the vitamin C, vitamin A. Did you say vitamin A? No, you didn't. BCMO1 gene, the beta-carotene monooxygenase gene. This gene lets you know if your body can efficiently convert vitamin A originally in what vegetables have, okay, beta carotene, that's the form that vegetables have. If you can convert it to the form that our bodies can actually use, which is retinol, that's done through the BCMO1 gene. If you're not very good at that, guess what? It's still good to eat vegetables and carrots and stuff, but you're not going to get your vitamin A from that. You're not going to be, at least not enough. And vitamin A is very important, eye health, skin health, all types of things. So if someone is dysregulated in that gene, they're really going to need to get it from an animal source, something that has already converted it for you. So these types of people may not do so well being vegetarians, or if they have a difficult time with B12 absorption in their FUT2 gene, they're not going to benefit very well being vegetarian. They need to have, more of those meat products and get it from these sources that have already converted it for them or that has better absorbability. So really it is very important to check these things, to work with someone who can interpret that best for you. One thing that I have people say, well, exactly what diet should I be having? Do you get that, Justin?
Yeah, that's sometimes one of the first things that they ask me, honestly, and it's like that's the nomenclature itself is something we're trying to get away from a little bit as far as like
Right.
specified. I want the diet that's your diet. Like if you came to me, Dr. Laura, I'd say, well, let's
Mhm.
find Dr. Laura's diet instead of one of these other categories.
Right.
It's just people enjoy putting things in categories, but really, I mean, this is about tailoring it to you. And by the way, I just have one comment about that BCMO1 gene.
Mhm.
This represents an opportunity for you to be a smartass at the dinner table because I just did this on Easter. We had carrots, and people are like, "Oh, carrots, they're good for your eyesight." I was like, they are if you have optimal BCMO1 because then your body can use the beta carotene and you don't need the retinol form because it's going to convert to retinol. But just so you guys know, next time you're at one of those dinners and people say carrots are good for your eyes, say only if you have the right genes for that.
Perfect. I love it. So this is one of the ways that we can use your DNA to help personalize the type of diet that you need. And I do have to say that we are not quite there yet with genetic understanding to say, hey, okay, you need just, chicken and broccoli and rice and that's it. Like that's the perfect thing because honestly, our genes don't quite work that way, at least our understanding of them at this time. We know generalities in the fact of like foods that have, for example, we were talking about the BCMO1 gene for vitamin A. Well, in order for you to get that nutrient, yeah, you can still eat carrots because there's other, nutrients in them. But if you are looking for vitamin A, you're going to need to get it from a different source, mainly a meat source. Or, I oftentimes recommend cod liver oil, a whole food. You get the benefits of it already being in, the retinol form, and you also get some vitamin D, you get your omega-3s. I always try to lean into food first or whole food supplementation first, then other types of supplements. But what I'm saying is that, again, it's not like the very specific food itself or like carrots in particular. It's just saying get sources that have it in this form, or, that's what I'm talking about, to actually say, okay, for all the things that are on your plate, you may be a candidate for, say, a low carbohydrate diet, where you only have, say, a certain percentage, of all the vegetables or all the carbohydrates. By the way, carbohydrates are not just breads and rices and, starchy potatoes. Okay. Carbohydrates also include fruits and vegetables. Okay. We're talking about complex carbohydrates and as well as starches, more of those simple carbohydrates. So for all the carbohydrates on your plate, if you are a candidate for a low carbohydrate diet, then you really shouldn't have more than 25% of all of your carbohydrates being starches, or 15% being starches, depending on, other aspects. This is the type of guidance that your genetics can provide in the way of eating. Also, with the fact that we are dynamic beings. We live, for the most part, in locations where we have seasons. Okay. Like I said, for the most part. So there are different crops that rotate, things that grow naturally, throughout the year. As dynamic beings, our food, our nutrition should not be static. It needs to be dynamic with us in the environment, of our ancestors or of where we are living, and what we are interacting with. There's still a certain spectrum of which you work within, but it's knowing what works best for you. So, and of course, that does not negate your gut biome, which really plays a huge aspect. And that's where things like the GSTM1 gene, the FUT2 gene come in to help us get an idea on gut health for you.
Yeah, well, and that's where I also get a little bit wary of really restrictive diets as far as the diversity of things that you're able to eat. Like I have nothing against, people doing carnivore for a period of time. I've seen plenty of healing and things take place because of that. Where I'm a little bit wary about longevity of diets that really limit you to only one or two food sources is that alpha diversity in the gut is pretty important. And the gut, I mean, when we say gut, it's actually the entirety of the intestinal tract, which is like 9 meters long, by the way. Right. So picture the high dive at the local swimming pool. That's 9 meters in the air. That's what's inside of you right now. And all throughout that digestive tract, there's like little sectors, right? It's like there's little sphincter things that actually cut it off. So there's all these different sections, and different sections have different pH balances. There's different acidity levels section by section. So that means that different microbiota will actually live or die based on the pH balance. So we end up with all of these different types of microbiota in there, and different microbiota do different things. Some of them might make neurotransmitters. That's why we say that the gut is the second brain. Some of them might ferment carbohydrates. Some of them might be pathogenic. Some of them might be beneficial. Some of them might create short chain fatty acids and help you to digest different things and lower inflammation. If we were to suddenly take a varied diet and restrict it all the way down to eating a steak a day, which some people, they do need to do that for autoimmune reasons and things. What you can do is you can starve some of the beneficial bacteria that are expecting the asparagus and the orange and the whatever else you might have eaten normally. So that's where I'm a little bit hesitant to recommend extreme diets for a prolonged period of time. I think that they can be very useful, but just remember that we have like 6 pounds of bacteria living in our gut. 6 pounds. And if you were to take the head of a needle, you would fit like a million of them on that head. So think about how many 6 pounds actually represents, and know that they do different things. Then they need to be fed by different input of food, right? Different foods have different prebiotic fibers and things on there that feed the microbiota. So I think that even when we talk about genes, it's one aspect where we can talk about, the macronutrients, micronutrients. This is great and valuable information, but understand even within that, there's a pretty big conversation to have about food selection and what you do and what you don't do. This is impacting every cell in your body, after all.
So I am seeing some great questions in the chat that I want to address. And by the way, if you have some more questions, please go in the question and answer. Pop your questions in the question and answer, please. But Mary had asked, as I was talking, and when we were talking about, the BCMO1 gene with vitamin A, we mentioned about different places you can get it. And she was talking about animal-based, which meat is best. And I love that question, because a lot of people wonder, what is best? And this is where I say, well, it depends. It depends on a few different things. First of all, not all meats are the same, just like not all water is the same, a lot of things are the same. When you really start narrowing it down, is that meat source coming from a happy, healthy, grass-fed, grass-finished cow, or is it coming from one of those CAFO cows, that are pumped full of antibiotics and things like that? Chickens, Is it a free-range happy chicken, or is it one that is, in those pens? They're all chickens, okay? The other ones, they're all beef, but they are nowhere near the same. So this is where know what your sources are. Do your homework. When you are purchasing your food, find, companies that can even source, foods, meats, poultry, fish, that these proteins that have well-sourced, low toxic load, or preferably no toxic load, take a look at that. Really pay attention. And then, of course, organic as much as possible.
Yeah, I'm sorry, Dr. Laura. I was going to say,
No,
with
please.
regard to retinol in animal-based forms here, because that's where it comes from, I think liver is definitely one of your best choices there. Not everybody wants to eat it, and it's difficult to source sometimes. So personally, I supplement with it. And when we say supplement, but we're talking about like food-based supplements, it's really one and the same with food in this case, right? So liver, I mean, it's so friggin' high in vitamin A. You can actually get vitamin A toxicity if you eat too much liver. Like, that's how much retinol is in there. So the inclusion of it, every couple of days, if you were to pop a handful of capsules, that represents like 3 ounces of grass-fed liver, you're going to be covered for retinol. Like, you're not going to need to seek any other sources of it. And then we're not getting it from a synthetic source either, right? This is still a food-based source. Meat absorbs into meat pretty well, and we're made out of meat, a lot of it. So I recommend doing that. And if you don't like eating liver, then I think just supplementing with it is going to cover you pretty well for retinol. And if you have like a moderate version of BCMO1, then you can rely a little bit on the yellowish foods, like, carrots or sweet peppers, or something that's got that beta carotene in there, and then just dose yourself up now and again with the liver. And beyond that, I mean, even just normal grass-fed steak is going to have some vitamin A as well. So you got a few options.
Absolutely. And thank you so much for, for the information that you are giving to people. You know what? Seeing that we've got more and more questions coming in, why don't we start answering some of them? Because I think that can really lend to some great information and more questions even. So, I do want to make mention, Faye made a great comment. Trauma and stress affect the gut and digestion. Most definitely. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Hormones can be affecting that too. And anytime the gut is impaired, your immune system is going to be impaired. Your hormones are going to start getting dysregulated. Cortisol levels are going to go up. That can lead to weight gain, which comes back to a major area you guys were concerned about. So you're absolutely correct. It is really important when we talk about stress, as well as your relationship to food. And this is something I kind of commented on earlier that I do want to spotlight for just a moment, because our relationship with food is very important, because it goes beyond what food does for us, because we're leaning in on food to help with, help give us that dopamine kick, that feeling of, happiness or calmness or security. But it's not for nutrition. It's for those emotional feelings. And when we are stressed, when we have anxiety, fears, or other type of emotional things, the gene that is oftentimes related to that is the FTO gene. Also in our mood and behavior, there's a whole suite of genes that relate to this. Our dopamine receptors, the DRD2 gene, the COMT gene, the COMT gene, how quickly we clear those neurotransmitters. There are several. I'm not going to run through each of them, but it is the functional pathways and how this works, that information transfer, like I was talking about the FTO gene. How quickly does your gut tell your brain, hey, I'm full, stop? So you pair a dysregulated FTO gene with anxiety and dysregulation and your tendency, or if you have a tendency to lean in on food in times of stress or anxiety, your weight is going to go up. Okay. The dysregulation of the gut is going to get worse. This is really important because it's a multimodal aspect or focus when it comes to food, when it comes to what you need as compared to what you want or what you don't want, because you could get into that cycle of, oh, I just ate that pint of Ben and Jerry's, and now I'm going to hate on myself because I just did that. And then it just gets you in this spiral. And we don't want to increase the inflammation. We don't want to increase the stress and the dysbiosis. So we're not going to be focusing on that as much, but I want you all to be aware that that's an important aspect. Okay.
Yeah, I have a whole concept where I talk about eating in a parasympathetic state, right?
Yeah.
Like we're all so sympathetic dominant these days, and then we go to eat and our gut doesn't know what to do with it. And it's got a lot of trickle down effect as well into our immune system because there's something called SIG-A, secretory IgA, and it's one of the primary defenders of the gut, and it tends to get lowered and dysregulated in response to like cortisol dominance and HPA axis dysregulation as well. So that's absolutely a good point that stress, there's no doubt that it affects the gut. Like that's a direct effect that it has. And once SIG-A goes down, well, now your body and your gut is a lot more open to those pathogenic species as well. So dysbiosis can kick in, and that can, impact your neurotransmitters and neuromodulators. And it's just a big, long cascade that you need to put the brakes on as soon as possible. So I recommend, regardless of if you have a religious affiliation, a little gratitude or a prayer or something surrounding your meals. Take a couple long exhales, right? And just be with your food. That parasympathetic activation can actually, in and of itself, help digestion.
And honestly, I have a lot of clients that they say, "Oh gosh, I eat such a healthy diet. I eat organic. I'm so careful, and I eat to my genes." But then I start asking, "Well, how do you eat?"
Yeah.
"Oh, well, I'm rushed and the kids, and I got to get them here, or I'm eating in the car," and it's just kind of like, okay, there's a big aha in the fact that if you are spending all this money and focus and energy into eating the right foods, make sure that you are actually absorbing it. And you're not going to be absorbing it if you are not chewing it. I mean, the whole point of chewing is to help with that mechanical digestion before and as the chemical digestion happens. So it's like, the old thing of your grandmother saying, chew your food, 30 times each bite. There's a reason for that. Do that. I love how you were saying getting your body in that parasympathetic state. Bless your food. Be grateful for your food. Hopefully, most of the time, you are sitting with people you love, enjoying that food. So, being aware of that and being grateful and taking the time, putting your fork down in between bites, allowing that time for your gut to tell your brain, hey, I'm getting full or I'm full. There's a Japanese saying, Hari Hachibu, stop eating at 80% full. And people with dysregulated FTO genes, they don't get that signal. I'm one of them, where I can end up eating more, your eyes bigger than your stomach. Yeah. And it's like all of a sudden it hits you like a rock and you're like, oh my gosh, I'm so full. So techniques to learn going, okay, how much of a portion do I need that I know that this will be about 80% full or where I won't feel overfull? People with certain profiles can lead them to possibly binging. Might not be the best thing to go to these open buffets. Okay. And there are techniques and things that you can do to help you with that, which works into, weight management and realizing, when you are full. So we have got some wonderful questions I want to get through. Let's see. So the first one I am seeing is from Mary, and she says, although I feel my diet is healthy based on the DNA 360, I'm curious about whether I'm absorbing the nutrients because after COVID, I got post-infectious microscopic colitis. So I'm confident that I'm doing the right thing on DNA, but not at all confident about the chronic disease impact here, which is daily diarrhea. I am so sorry that you are dealing with that. There can definitely be more going on. And so looking at your DNA, first of all, understanding that your DNA, like we had said before, plays a part. Another thing that I want to say is that with situations like this, because although I am a doctor, I'm not your doctor. This is the information that I'm giving is more informational, not as a form of direction, because I don't know your history. I don't know all of your DNA markers. So, please take this, with that grain of salt and understanding. But looking at your DNA, with things that we have talked about, this is where you can understand, hey, what kinds of foods do I need? What nutrients do I need? What types of supplementation can I help? But even then, even if you are doing that, and like you had mentioned, post-COVID, getting this infection, that works more with the current health of your microbiome, the disruption of your immune system and it fighting each other. Remember, I said your gut is your immune system. And COVID, long COVID, the spike protein from the COVID vaccines have shown to affect your gut, your immune system, and several other tissues in the body. So at colitis, the itis means inflammation. All right. So your body is inflamed. It is fighting that your immune system is being overactivated and causing that in the gut. So there are things that can be done, but again, it would be difficult for me to really go into that because again, I don't know your history. DNA will give you information on how to support at that blueprint level. But what you're dealing with is more at that epigenetic level, at the level of we are currently in crisis and what needs to be done at a therapeutic level. Would you agree, Justin?
Yeah, well, and I also think that there's a lot of moving parts to digestion and to how that all goes. I mean, everything from the mucosal barrier, right? So checking things like zonulin levels can be useful. If zonulin's elevated and there's a lot of these tight junctions being opened at the same time, that can lend itself to the opportunity for these different species to come in that we don't want, that cause that dysbiosis. So, I mean, maybe some peptide therapy or something like that may be in your interest. That's not official advice I'm giving you, of course. But yeah, I mean, GI mapping, mucosal barrier assessments, all the way to liver congestion and looking at, bile flow and different things that can all matter, especially if you have chronic diarrhea because of it. Sometimes that can even be, amplified by bile flow issues. So I think doing, GI mapping and doing a few of these tests are going to take you a little bit beyond what the genes can suggest. This is a nature and nurture thing, right? So the genes represent nature. That's what you're born with. But when you get something like COVID, right, that's another epigenetic signal, a virus, right? That's something that came from the outside and altered what's going on inside. So, anything that you can do to lower inflammation, anything that you can do to strengthen up your mucosal barrier, introduce some high quality species in there, make sure you've got enough hydrochloric acid, right? There's so many different variables to it that I would recommend possibly a coaching program for you to see what more you can do. I don't think the genes alone will be enough, if I'm perfectly honest, once you already have microscopic colitis.
Thank you for that insight. We have a interesting question from Pamela, and she says, "Are there genes we know for fulvic acid? I can't find it on my DNA test." And I'm not sure if you were thinking of maybe a different thing, but fulvic acid, you are not going to find any genes because fulvic acid itself is not encoded by any genes. It actually, fulvic acid is complex organic compound formed through the breakdown of plant matter by soil microbes. Now, fulvic acid, which oftentimes is used as a source of trace minerals, as a source for detoxification. Research shows it influences, okay, fulvic acid influences gene expression in humans and other organisms through different biochemical reactions or interactions. So, like it can work through lipid metabolism genes and antioxidant genes, like I was saying about like detoxification, but in all, there aren't any genes for fulvic acid in humans. Okay. So, yeah, if there was is something else that you were thinking of, please, pop it in the Q&A and we'll get back to that.
Yeah, unless she meant folic acid, but I mean, those are very
I,
different things, of course.
right.
Um, but I will say for fulvic acid, I use fulvic and humic acid on a daily basis. I know that you, what's her name from Beam Minerals? You interviewed her, I remember.
Yeah, Caroline Allen.
Yeah, yeah. So she's awesome, and she
For
knows
sure.
tons of stuff about
Yes.
minerals, and I'm a big fan of Beam, and it's definitely one of the best supplements that I take daily. It's great for mitochondria, hydration, brain function, et cetera, et cetera. Detox as well at the level of the gut, by the way, that can help that as well.
So we've got our next question from Faye, and I think she wrote this when you were talking about the TCF7L2 and saturated fats, because she said, if I have a suboptimal TCF7L2, does that include saturated fats in nuts and seeds?
Yes, it does. Really, it includes all macros, right? Because too much fat or too much carbs, even lots and lots of protein, really can have an insulin response as well. And TCF7L2, it just represents the baseline insulin response and how likely it is that it's going to be dysregulated in response to an abundance of different macronutrients. Out of all three macros, I mean, you could argue ketones is a fourth macro. I would actually prioritize protein. That's probably going to be the most insulin stable. If you're trying to prioritize weight loss, especially, that's actually one of my baseline strategies for people that do have suboptimal insulin response is I'll prioritize protein because A, it's a little bit more insulin neutral than either of the other two. B, there's something called the thermic effect of feeding, where like when you eat protein, it actually burns a certain amount of calories to metabolize protein. So protein is one of your better macronutrient choices when it comes to that. But really, whether or not it's a plant or an animal source of saturated fats, because like coconut oil is a saturated fat as well, I would say it's going to have the same response if you're actually dysregulated for TCF7L2. Now, there is a couple of nuances there because dairy will also have things like casein in there and things that can spike blood sugar alongside that. So you might be a little bit better off with plant sources in that respect. But overall, I think it's going to cause you the same issue. And it's going to take the same amount of work to figure out what's best for you. Anything to
Thank
add
you.
to that, Dr. Laura?
I think you covered that quite well. All right, so our next question is from Pamela, and she is asking, is there an app or calculator that we suggest about how to figure out how to get that 25% of calories from starch carbs? Because she had mentioned that Chronometer doesn't break down starch carbs that she can see, not to mention just calculating on how to get percentages of total calories. Yeah, you're right. Chronometer, it's great for tracking total carbs, fiber, sugar, but it doesn't break out starch from complex carbs. So really different things that you can do. What you need to track is, your total carbs. So starch, sugar, fiber. Apps rarely give you the starch portion separately. So you can do a few things. Use an app that breaks it down better. For example, I think My Dietary. It does separate out starches under their detailed carb breakdown. If you subscribe to it, it also shows like fiber, sugar, alcohols, sugars, can be very helpful for looking at that functional health tracking. There's another one, it is free online, called Nutrition Data, that shows detailed carb breakdown, including starch for whole foods. And let's see, I think another one might be Open Food Facts or Food Data Central. It's through USDA. Both are web-based, but it will allow you to look up individual foods for their detailed macronutrient breakdown, including starch content. And then what you can do is you could just use like a manual calculator, finding out your total calorie goal, say, for example, 2,000 calories. Let's make it a round number. So you're doing 2,000 calories a day. Then what you would do is just calculate out 25% of that total calories. So for example, you'd want about 500 calories from starch. And then, just taking a look at going, okay, here's your foods, obviously knowing what a starch is. Okay. So any breads, rice, potatoes, things like that, how much do you have? Usually you can get the weight of it. And actually this is where Chronometer could actually work, where you can then do some measurements and then just do an estimate. So, it's not perfect, but you can do that. And also kind of eyeing it. Looking at that total amount, because it's not like you're going to go calculating out at every meal. It has to be something that is practical that you can live with. So, Giselle actually said MyFitnessPal, she believes is good and was recommended. So, because she's doing some carb cycling. So,
Yeah, well, the nice thing about MyFitnessPal as well is that you can also scan barcodes, right? Like of your
thanks.
groceries, and it'll
Yeah.
tell you what's in there. I've heard, anyways. So don't quote me on this, anybody. But the newest Chat GPT, like the 4, I think it is. Apparently, you can actually use that for the same purpose. And we know that Chat GPT is a pretty good resource. It's not 100%, but it's pretty good. So maybe someone check that out, and on the next webinar, let me know if it works.
Yeah, perfect. Okay, so Diana has our next question, and she's asking, is resistant starch, for example, cooled potatoes, the better option for those of us who don't process starches according to her gene profile?
Resistant starch is awesome. I think that it's really valuable and useful, and it's something that you can do even if you don't have the best starch metabolizing genes possible, because it really changes the structure of the carbohydrate. And it can be, you can do the same thing with rice. If you cook it and then you cool it, even if you heat it back up again after that, it's actually still, for the most part, changed the structure of the carbohydrates, and it kind of lines the intestine as opposed to going right into the bloodstream. So it acts as more of a prebiotic fiber, which can help to feed the probiotics in your gut lining. So I've always used that strategy. I think cooking and cooling potatoes is a great idea, and you're going to get less of a glycemic response as well. So that can even help if you have dysregulated TCF7L2. So personally, I'm a fan of it. Yeah. Dr. Laura, are you a fan of that strategy as well?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, anytime that you are cooking your potatoes or rice or anything, cooling it first completely, then reheating it it keeps that resistant starch level. It increases and does that. It's absolutely wonderful. I love doing that. Obviously, there are times that it's not so practical. And it's like, oh crap, I got to get some dinner on the table. Let's just do this. Do the best you can. But if you can do some time prep, then allow yourself the time to cook that, let it cool, and then you can reheat it. So yeah, I've actually read some studies on that, and that it can actually reduce the starch, and create that resistant starch up to, I think it was like 30 to 40%, which can actually be quite dramatic and very useful. So absolutely. All right. So Angela, she's asking, can I use my ancestry data? And I would suspect that you are talking about uploading it to our app, to then propagate information through the My DNA Way app. And as far as I know, as long as it's in a CSV file, similar to like 23andMe, how you have the raw data, you can upload that information, and that will process and give you information through our reports. Now, will it have everything? No, because these other companies, they don't do some of the testing that we do as far as like copy number variants or indels, insertion deletions. So it probably wouldn't be a full, complete report, but it could give you enough information to at least get started. And then it's something that you can think about to get our DNA 360 test done. And our angels in the background, if any of that information was incorrect, if you wouldn't mind, please, popping information in the chat, or, coming on and letting us know. But I do believe that you can use that. All right. So our next question, Delia. She says, I have the anti-vegetarian gene ABCG8 under plant sterols. Does this mean I shouldn't eat foods high in plant sterols? Okay, so for that, we don't specifically test for that gene. I mean, the question, I don't know what tests that you had done. I mean, I do know that gene, dealing with plant sterols, it would suggest that you should be cautious with foods high in plant sterols, especially from any concentrated or fortified sources. But in general, or at least specifically, I should say, for our DNA 360 test, we don't test for that one in particular. We look at functional genes, things that are clinically actionable, that can really make a difference. We don't fire hose you with 1,000 or more gene variants to go, here you go. We really look at this in a way that is useful, that looks at it from more of a root cause. And what can we do at a foundational level that will make the changes downstream? All right. So our next question is from Kelly. So for a genetic profile where serotonin and dopamine are cleared extremely quickly, is supplementation necessary forever to balance that brain chemistry? Justin, you want to take that one?
I wouldn't go so far as to say supplementation is forever necessary, because there's a few different ways to influence that profile, right? Like as far as the like the serotonin, it's like your quality of sleep, for example, plays a really big role there. Your gut health plays a really big role there, because like 80% of it is produced in the gut. I'm assuming that when you say supplementing, you mean like the precursors of serotonin, like, the 5-HTPs of the world. And I think that really it's one of these things where we look at it as a map, right? Like we look at all of your different cognitive genes, and if it's clearing really quickly based on something like a 5-HTTLPR being short, there's actually good and bad in that profile. It's a little bit more nuanced because if you have like dysregulated serotonin, you actually tend to be one of these people like Dr. Laura, who's really great with attention to detail, right? Like there's positives and negatives that come with each and every profile, and I don't think that you necessarily need to supplement in order to get the best expression out of that. What I would say genes that you have to supplement for are ones where you're just not able to process a micronutrient, for example. Well, yeah, we're going to need to fill in a gap there. That's part of what supplements are for. But when you have a profile that has a lot of moving parts to it, I don't think you have to necessarily rely on that. Like, for example, when it comes to serotonin, I do the carb backloading trick, and that actually helps to up your serotonin levels before bed. And then it converts to melatonin, and you get a bit of a better sleep, which in and of itself improves your serotonin profile. Um, so I don't know if I answered that entirely, but it's just I'm trying to say there's more than one way to skin a cat, and supplements aren't necessarily the only way to do it. There's also precursors in certain foods, right? You can get things that have the precursors right in there. To where you don't always have to be on a supplement till the end of time. What do you think on that one, Dr. Gordon?
Um, yeah, I mean, it it really depends. I mean, I agree with you that, that forever thing, um, there's so much at play. And if you can get a lot of the precursors, a lot of the support from your food, you know, or say there is a hindrance, through stress or, some of these other, toxins that are, causing issues with, dopamine and serotonin clearance, by removing some of those things, that can actually help. That doesn't necessarily have to mean that it's supplemented. So now I think it was wonderful how you covered that. So we do have some more questions here that I'd like to get to. Let's see. So Marty says that I used a CGM, a continuous glucose monitor, for several months, and the nutritionist from the company said I need to increase my fat and protein consumption. My genetics said low fat and lower protein and higher healthy carb. I have done a higher fat diet before and did not lose any weight. Would you like to speak into that? Because I know that that you have information about this.
Yeah. So, I mean, I don't want to tell you not to do what your nutritionist suggested because that's your nutritionist and it's worthwhile dabbling in what their plan is. But if your genes suggest that a high fat diet doesn't serve you, and you've in fact done a high fat diet in the past and it didn't serve you, to me, those are pretty good indicators as to how your metabolism operates. There are things that we can do to improve fatty acid utilization, like time restricted, eating, or you can use ketone supplements. You can use L-lipase, you can use L-carnitine, different things that help kind of shuttle the fat into the mitochondria. I would need to know a little bit more as far as like how do you exercise, right? And how do you orchestrate even the fats that you are including, right? Are you including some Mediterranean sources, some high quality olive oils and getting some omega-3s in there? Or are we talking about seed oils? Are we talking about just butter? Like, what are we talking about, right? That's where it's a little bit more nuanced. Um, the protein may be a good suggestion, but if he or she doesn't know your genes and is asking you to do something that did not work for you in the past, I think you can likely trust your genes a little bit more and your own intuition. Sometimes we arrive at one of these hybrid diets as well, which is like on the higher end without being high, right? Like a moderate high fat, moderate high protein without being like keto, or bodybuilding as far as the protein content. But trust yourself. It sounds like you already answered your own question and you know what to do from here. So your instinct is definitely your highest serving aspect there as well.
And I would say it's also Not so much with the protein or how much protein per se. It's also how do you prepare it? If you are cooking your protein at high temperatures, you are increasing the damage, the carcinogens into your body. Okay. If you're cooking with, say, olive oil or some of these polyunsaturated fats, in cooking with them at all, but cooking with them at higher temperatures, you are having considerable oxidization and damage to those fats. Even though in and of themselves, using like olive oil as a finishing oil can be extremely helpful and very inflammatory. But if you are introducing a lot of these foods, these oils, to high temperatures of cooking or in ways where there is damage now done, that's going to cause inflammation to your body. That's going to put a lot of pressure on your detoxification pathways. This is going to increase the situation of gaining weight, of not being able to clear those toxins. So it's more than just the specific foods you are putting in your body. In what form, fashion, or damage are they in as you are putting them into your body? So again, something else to keep in mind. All right, so we have another question from Barbara, or actually, no, this is her first question. Can you talk about obesity that runs genetically through the family beyond just learning habits? Justin, I know you've got some great information on this.
Yeah, because as with everything, there's more than one moving part to it. I know that Dr. Varden already mentioned the FTO gene, which, by the way, FTO actually stands for the fat and obesity gene, which is not the nicest sounding thing, but that's what it stands for, and that really represents this signal that's supposed to go from your gut to your brain when you start to digest calories. And for some people, they have dysregulation there, and it is a genetic thing where that signal to say, stop eating, we've had enough calories, we're nourished now. For a lot of people, if they're dysregulated, it's a slower signal. So, and we find it runs in families as well. Sometimes a bunch of different family members have dysregulated FTO, and that means that that signal is not hitting your brain until it's already too late. You've already had the second or the third portion. I'll say for myself, I have dysregulated FTO, and my brother-in-law asked me if I had a tapeworm one time because I just ate. I can pack away ungodly levels of food, honestly. So I have to be a little bit aware of that. There's FTO. There's another one called MC4R, which is actually the same idea, but it exists at the level of the palate, right? So believe it or not, in the mouth, there's a signal that goes to your brain when you start chewing that says, okay, we've had enough now. For some people, that can be dysregulated as well. I really think too that the other moving part to it would be the dopamine profile that Dr. Laura was talking about as well. If you happen to be a high binder of dopamine, right, which means you get a big sensation off of anything that causes dopamine, food is highly dopaminergic, and then you're dysregulated for FTO and MC4R, it's a pretty good likelihood that food might be that vice of choice. It's very available, it's highly palatable, it's right there. Most of us in the Western world have lots of it available to us because at every street corner you can go and buy food, right? And if we don't have good mechanisms to shut that off, then yeah, I would say that's going to translate to the potential for obesity in a lot of people. Again, I mean, looking at the insulin response and all these things as well really matters, right? Because if you're overeating and you're suboptimal for TCF7L2 and you're having the wrong balance of macronutrients, well, now we've got a lot of issues compounding at the same time. But those would be the main ones. I would look at FTO, MC4R, and then your DRD2, your dopamine receptor.
Thank you for that. We've got a few more questions to go, so we'll try to get through these quickly. Jody's asking, she says her FUT2 gene is a GG variant. So really that just means that she doesn't absorb B12, cobalamin, through the gut very well, okay? And So she's asking, does this relate to oxalates, or is it more certain green vegetables that may or may not be very high in oxalates? Now, like I had said with the FUT2 gene, its relationship to B12, the FUT2 gene primarily influences gut microbiota composition as well, rather than directly determining oxalate metabolism. It can actually influence the levels of bifidobacterium species. So really, it doesn't have any direct link to oxalate absorption efficiency or anything else, related to that, because there are, the name of the species is, I forgot at the tip of my tongue. Anyway, there is a particular species that deals with oxalate breakdown, but the FUT2 gene is not directly related to that particular species. So on to the next. Dirk, hello. So glad you're here.
Hello,
All
Dirk.
right. So he always asks fantastic questions. Actually, I'm going to toss this one to you. He's asking, what are the set of tests one should get on, say, a yearly basis to reveal nutritional deficiencies that need to be addressed? Seeing that you are in a particular course and learning all about that, I would love for you to share that knowledge.
Yeah, and there's a few different avenues now for doing that. It's one of those things where it's good to get real-time data on micronutrient levels in the body. And so what Dr. Laura is referencing is I'm very close to being an FDN. I really like FDN. There's a lot of cool stuff that I get to test and mess around with because we test stool and spit and pee and all these things to find everything out about you possible. So I'm looking forward to incorporating that into the functional genomics thing. Currently, my best recommendation for that, actually, there's a company called SciFox, which is pretty cool when it comes to monitoring micronutrients, because it's an at-home test where you get a dashboard and you can actually upload the results and you can monitor it right on the dashboard there. So it's a blood spot, like a dried blood spot, and you can kind of have an ongoing dashboard there and you can see what your micronutrient levels are in real time. I think it's SIPHOX, SciFox. And that's a pretty cool one because you can do it in real time just like that. So check that one out if that's something that you're interested in. What do you do for that out of curiosity, Dr. Laura?
There's a lot of different wonderful tests. SpectraCell has a micronutrient test. You can also look at hair mineral analysis to see, what minerals might be there. Each of them have their strengths and weaknesses. So it really kind of depends on the availability for the test, cost. There's a lot of different micronutrient functional tests out there. So, and also looking at getting one that the provider that you're working with, what are they comfortable with? What can they read and what are they used to? That's generally helpful too. So we've got a very interesting question by Mary. And she says, I struggle with contrasting results because she says that she understands our genes are very dynamic. And I do want to say and preface that genes in themselves do not change, are not dynamic. Their expression is what changes and can be dynamic. So I wanted to make sure that I clarified that for everyone outside of her question. So she said that so many genes code for a particular trait. Basically, genes have several functions, and there's a lot of genes that have similar functions. But she's asking, how do I navigate what I need to get from, for example, retinol from meat, because it says that she should only have meat once per week because she doesn't detox well. And what advice would we give? I'm going to jump into this a little bit and say that is a general recommendation. There still is more to that. And there are other sources that we have mentioned that you can get vitamin A, cod liver oil, beef liver, or if you are doing some sort of supplementation, beef liver capsules or organ, desiccated organ capsules. There are different ways if you want to cut down the amount of meat intake, but it's also a matter of, okay, if you're not detoxing well, again, a lot of that is more in how do you prepare your food? Okay. What I had mentioned before, that cooking in higher heats or smoking, grilling, it does increase the amount of carcinogens and toxins in that protein. Does it mean that you can never have it? Not necessarily. You just have to make sure that your detoxification pathways are well and that you're not overburdened. But it doesn't necessarily mean that you can only have meat once a week. Again, this is something that's a little dynamic. And this is where the personalization comes in, because DNA, yes, that works towards the personalization of your nutrition, but that's only one aspect. That's your basic blueprint. But there's other parts and pieces of you that's very important, that when you are working with someone like myself or with Justin or another practitioner, we take more than just your DNA into account. We look at labs, we look at, stool tests, we talk to you. How do you feel? What is your life? There's got to be some kind of practicality, because the best diet for you is the one you can stick to, the one you can be consistent on, that works for you. So yeah, there's a lot of different aspects in that. Last two questions. Another one from Mary. I'm going to let you take this. Thoughts on long-term fasting, like 24 hours or more?
I think that fasting represents a valuable tool, and it's something that you can use. I would say that there's a number of asterisks that have to be put next to it, though, because it's a hormetic stress, right? And it's a balancing act. And it is something that if you're inexperienced, not saying you are, Mary, but in the event that you're inexperienced, you can definitely increase stress load on your body. What we don't want to do is give your body a lot of scarcity signals and make it feel like we're fasting because there's just no food available anywhere. But that being said, we know that there's tons of benefits to giving your microbiome that break, letting it clear out. You get this nice spike of BDNF, you get a nice spike of human growth hormone. There can certainly be some anti-aging benefits, some detoxification benefits. I'm a fan of it. However, I think that it's something that you should go into with a little bit of guidance, especially if you're going to do the longer fasts. I recommend starting pretty simple, like a 12 and 12. If you're going to get into the 24 plus, you may want to modify it with some bone broth, some amino acids, something like that. But as a baseline strategy, I think it's got tons of value, but it's not something that we want to disrespect or jump into with both feet, because there can be some downsides.
Thank you for that. Okay, last question. And I want to say to everyone, thank you, for hanging in there and for, being here. I've been seeing some wonderful comments in the chat about things that you've been getting out of this and that you're enjoying this. And we love that. So our last question is from Susan. She's asking, do you recommend taking digestive enzymes for people like herself who have the FUT2GG variant, plus carbohydrates, fats, lactose supplement, suboptimal genes to help break down the food and absorb them better, in addition to chewing the food more slowly, blessing, etc. And yes, actually, this is something we had chatted about before we started the webinar. Enzymes are important. And again, if this is something that is lacking for you, it goes beyond just the FUT2 gene, because again, that does more directly work with the bifidobacterium. But having those enzymes helps to support the digestion of these macronutrients, okay? Because again, you need to break them down into smaller packets of information that your body can actually then utilize. So overall, it generally is a good idea. The specifics of which would be more important for, who we're working with to actually know the information. People who've had their gallbladder removed, like my mother, doctor never told her to get digestive enzymes or use ox bile. And, thankfully she had me and I told her about it and got her on that. To make sure that she could, because she's not making those bile acids as well. She is making them, but she's not storing them because she doesn't have her gallbladder. So if she eats heavier, fattier foods and forgets to take it, like she has before, terrible, stomach, GI issues, not working so well, with the digestion. So yes, it can be very appropriate for some. But again, working with a practitioner to see what would be best, because there are a lot out there, can definitely be helpful.
Yeah, and I have one comment on that as well, that almost everybody is going to benefit from taking digestive enzymes. And there's a lot of different digestive enzymes, right? There's proteolytic, and there's one specific to lactose, and there's one specific to gluten and starches and all these things. What I would say is, if you are going to dabble in enzymes, you may want to take a spectrum, right? Like have a few different types in there. But you need to be aware as well, and this is where I recommend doing the GI mapping. Some people who have a lot of like H. pylori and some of these pathogenic species, enzymes wouldn't be the place to start. You want to be a little bit careful with taking a lot of proteolytic enzymes if there's these opportunistic pathogens in there. So maybe do the gut 360 as well if before you jump on like a heavy dose of digestive enzymes, because there can be some contraindications there. But most people really should be taking enzymes other than that, because all of our food gets cooked. And when you cook it, a lot of the natural enzymes die. And we need them. Enzymes are what do all the work in the body. So just be aware of that.
Well, with that brilliant comment and all the other brilliant information you have shared with us, I want to say thank you. Thank you, Justin. You are always such a wealth of information. So brilliant. I am so excited, for you going through the FDN program and finishing up and just adding more tools to your toolbox to make you even more of a genius than you already are. I love working with you. I love doing these webinars with you. And I love each and every one of you who have joined us, who are listening to us, who are taking your time to spend with us to learn. And that's what we're here for. Thank you. And if there's anything that you want to learn more about, please let us know. We are here for you. So with that, I would like to say adieu. Have a beautiful night. Take care and eat well.
You're the best, Dr. Varden. We'll see you on the next one. Thanks, everybody.